Shalom and welcome to Mama Rahel Ministries. This week portion is a very interesting portion because it actually deals with the offerings that were brought to the temple during when the temple was standing. Now it's very important for us to consider that the legality of the offerings, and also we have to consider what the sacred space is. So I'm gonna guide you through this Torah portion briefly into what the sacred space is and why the sacred space is so important. During the last weeks, we've been studying how Israel rebellions have caused chaos, death, and exile. Actually, they were banned from going into the land of Israel because they rejected the land, the gift of God. Now, it's very interesting because by them rejecting the gift of God, after this, we will see continual chaos within the camp until last week portion when they were in front of Baal Peor. And what happened there is like a culminating story to Israel's rebellion. Now, remember that everybody that was from that generation died within the desert, and only the new generation were supposed to go into the land. So now, when we go to the chapter 25 of the book of Numbers, it will tell us that remember that Balak was trying to find a, a, a curse for the people of Israel. So they could not curse the people of Israel, obviously, because they were blessed. So now the purpose was different. It was to bring immorality from inside the camp of Israel, which will actually bring um, chaos inside the camp. So that was the proposed plan for them to do, to bring Moabites woman into the camp where Israel would join to them in idolatry rites and therefore causing rebellion against the covenant of God, which would bring chaos, death, and exile. So now let's go into the book of Numbers, chapter 25, verse 1. It says, when Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to commit sexual immorality with the daughter of Moab. This woman invited the people to the sacrifice of their god. Then the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And this is very important information for us to consider because it's going to actually help us understand the contrast between the sacrifices that they did in the ancient Near East to Baal, and in Egypt, Baal in Mesopotamia, I mean in Canaan, and later before in Egypt when they were in Egypt. Also, we have to consider the way they worship in Mesopotamia because Israel was part of its life. It was in Mesopotamia, in Babylon, and Assyria, and other places. So it will actually give us an information to what God actually told the people of Israel not to do, yet they continually ended up doing the same customs of the nations. And we will find that it was an act of idolatry, obviously being considered rebellion to the covenant of God. And for that reason, they were expelled from the land at some points. And also they went into exile, chaos, and death. So now let's consider that in contrast to the offerings in the book of Numbers chapter 28 and 29. If we go here to Numbers 28, it's going to give us a contrast to what God actually wants from his people. Remember, in order for us to understand this better, we have to understand the book of Leviticus. We have to understand the offerings in the temple. We have to understand the temple. This is something very important for somebody who studied the Bible. Because remember, 279 commandments, they actually deal with temple service, with the Levites, the Kohanim, and the temple service. So if we remove those 279 commandments from the 613, that's a lot of commandments that we will not be studying, and therefore it's going to allow us to commit certain sometimes some type of errors or some type of usurpation or legal consequence that we should have if we don't follow those commandments, because some of them are you shall not do or you shall do. For example, people today, they believe that they are priests according to Melchizedek, and they can do some stuff that legally are bound only to the temple and only to the son of Aaron. So that's why it's very important for us to consider the commandments. Now let's go here to the daily offerings. It says that they were supposed to bring daily offerings and also the extra offerings for the services. Verse 1 from chapter 28 says, The Lord spoke to Moses, command Israelite with regard to my offering. Be sure to offer my food for my offering made by fire. Now, it's very important for us to consider what food would be considered in the temple context and also in ancient Near East context. When we study ancient Near East, obviously the food was for the survival, for the deities, and also to the underworld. Now, when we study the Bible, obviously the Psalm chapter 50, it tells us that God does not need any food. So it was considered as a lawyer or a covenant um, requirement for the people of Israel to bring the offering, but not as a food source for God. Actually, the food, some parts of the animal were given to the priest so they can eat, so they can do the services in the temple and so on. So, but they were never considered actual food for God to eat. That's why when we have ancient Near East and we have the temple, it's a contrast that we have to find in between both of them. The God of Israel is not the same God from the nations. It does not follow the same custom from the nations. He wants to be worshipped, revered in a completely different way. Now it says that it says, as a pleasing aroma to me in its appointed time. You will say to them, this is the offering made by fire. So it has to be made at the appointed times. Now there's different kind of offering. There were the offerings that were brought every week during Shabbat. There was the offering that was done every day, the tamid during the morning and the afternoon. Then we have the weekly, the Shabbat. We have the monthly offering, which are each day of the first of the month. We have for Passover and so on. So we have a lot of offerings. Now I'm gonna read you from here. This is an application of the commandments, and I'm gonna read an article that it talks about the musafim. What are the musafim and what's the legality behind them? So it says biblical legality among the commandments associated with biblical festivals. One of the least understood is the obligation to present the korban musaf, the additional offering prescribed for Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and the annual festivals. It is often viewed merely as an extra sacrifice, but from the legal perspective of the Torah, it represents much more. It is a juridical declaration that a particular day has been elevated by God to a distinct status within the covenant calendar. The Musaf does not replace the continual offering, the Tamid. Rather, it is added to it. Its legal function is to declare that a given day possesses a higher degree of holiness and therefore require an additional act of public worship before God. Now, let me mind you that there is a lot of stuff that were done in the ancient world, like let's say something simple like bringing the first fruits. In the ancient world, in the ancient Near East, it was given to the deities and the underworld. Now, keep in mind that God, the God of Israel, actually requires for you to bring also the bikurim or the first offerings. Now, the difference between the ancient Near East and the Bible is that they are presented in the altar to God and they are not given to the underworld. They are not given to the deity to make them give more or produce more or try to buy the blessing from the God. In Israel, is bringing the first fruit. Bringing the first fruit is a tribute to the God and a means of being thankful to God for the provision that He has provided, because He has provided the rains in the appointed times. While in the ancient Near East, the gods, they needed to be fed. Also, they needed to be given the food at the appointed times so that they could perform their work in the cosmos and keep the cosmos in its proper order. So it's completely different than in the ancient East and the Bible mentality. So it says the Musaf does not replace the continual. Okay. require additional. The legal foundation of the musaf. The legislation is found primarily in Numbers 28 and 29, introduced by a solemn command. Command the children of Israel and said to them, my offering, my food, for my offering made by fire, a pleasing aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at its appointed time. A command addressed to the entire nation, although only the priest physically performed the sacrifice. The command is directed to all Israel. Jacob Milgrom observed that the public sacrifice legally represented the entire covenant community. The nation bears responsibility for the worship. The priest merely functioned as an authorized representative. So the obligation is to the children of Israel, while the priests are the representative, the legal representative by God, for them to approach the offering to the altar and present the offering to God. And by they doing so, they represent not only themselves, but they also represent the whole nation of Israel. The expression Be'moado at its appointed time does not simply refer to a date on the calendar. Within priestly terminology, a moed is an official appointed time established by God. The sacrifice must be offered precisely because the covenant king has designated that moment as an official audience before him. Milgrom notes that the priestly calendar transforms time into sacred space. Certain days possess a juridical holiness that require a corresponding liturgical response. So now we are coming into the legal aspect of the Musafim. Some of them represent holiness within that day that it needs a liturgical response. That's why the people of Israel were supposed to go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year because they had to present themselves before the king as a vassal present himself before the great king. So God being the great king, Israel being the vassals, they have to come and present before God. And then you have the priests that are going to present the offerings as the mediators. Now, there is something very important because it tells us also here that it's appointed, established by the appointed times are established by God, and it must be offered, the offering must be done precisely because the covenant king has designated that moment as an official audience before him. So now the people of Israel, they have to come to meet their king. They have to come to be seen by their king because God is the giver of the covenant, and Israel have accepted the covenant. So therefore, it has a covenant obligation. What does the musaf means? It is derived from the Hebrew yasaf, meaning to add. It does not describe a sacrifice that differs in nature from the daily offering. Rather, it is a sacrifice added to the continual tamid offering. Musaf never replaces the tamid. It always presupposes the legal function of the musaf. Each festival is assigned a specific number of sacrificial animals. For example, during Passover, number 28, 16 to 25, 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and 1 male goat. During Sukkot, number 29, the number of bulls decreased each day. This demonstrates that the sacrifices are not determined by human preference, but by the legal statute of God. Each day possesses its own distinct juridical identity. The Musaf, number 2, is a public obligation belonging to the entire nation, not dependent upon individual sin, personal vows, or private religious needs. Baruch Levine observed that this sacrifice constitutes the century's official liturgical program and express the ongoing continuity of the covenant relationship between Israel and its God. Therefore, number 28 and 29 represent a further stage in the centralization of Israel's national worship, developing the festival legislation of Leviticus 23 into a more comprehensive and structured cultic system. So God actually connected the covenant with the offerings that they were supposed to bring to the temple. So that's why the temple is so important for us to understand the framework of the covenant, because the response from Israel as a loyal vassal is to bring the offerings at the appointed times before God, not only the tamid, but also the musafin and the offerings for Shabbat, which are actually musafin are the extra offerings. And now there is a specific way that they have to be presented in the temple based on which offerings come first and which offering comes last. They have a pattern that they have to follow. Now, Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28 and 29. For example, Leviticus 23 emphasizes the sacred assemblies, cessation of work, and the festival calendar. Numbers 28, 29 add the exact quantities, sacrificial animals, order of offering, and administration of service. So, what does Musaf never replace? Why does Musaf never replace the Tamid? The Tamid represent Israel's continual covenant relationship with God. The Musaf represent a temporary intensification during a special appointed time throughout Numbers 28 and 29. The Torah repeatedly states, besides the continual burnt offering. Legally, this signifies that the covenant's permanent foundation never disappeared. The festival do not establish a new covenant relationship. They simply impose additional covenantal obligation during days of heightened holiness. Theological significance. The festival were far more than historical memorials. Each one constituted an official appearance before the great king. Throughout the ancient Near East, vassals periodically appear before their sovereign bearing tribute. Israel follows a similar covenant pattern, yet the tribute ultimately belongs to God himself. Scripture calls the animal my food, not because God required nourishment, but because sacrificial language juridically designates what belongs exclusively to the covenant king. As Gordon Wenham explained, such anthropomorphic language expresses God's acceptance within the covenant relationship rather than any physical need on part of the deity. So basically, the language that is used in my food is a language of a covenant of the offering being accepted by God as God of the covenant. Now let me go here to a presentation that I have. Let's go over this really quick. What were the general function of offering in the ancient Near East? Very important for us to consider. What are offering in the ancient Near East? More than worship. In the ancient Near East, and particularly in the Hebrew Bible, offerings were not merely acts of worship. They constitute a concrete and public demonstration of loyalty to the deity, with depth, with deep political, spiritual, and legal implication. For example, visible gesture of commitment. Offerings tangibly express a series of fundamental attitudes of the worshipper toward their God: submission before divine authority, personal and communal devotion, gratitude for received benefits, active fidelity to the God being worshipped. Now, when we study the covenants in the ancient Near East context, and we understand why a vassal would be faithful to the sovereign and why he would act in certain way. Obviously, it was because of gratitude and an unmerited grace extended to him. It could have been saved from death in a war. It could have been saved from dying by not having food, being having famine or something like that. It could have been other saved from another nation during war. So it could be various circumstances. The God of Israel actually removed Israel from slavery. God listened to the cry of his people in Egypt, and he removed them from the realm of slavery and bring them out of bondage. God protect them. God bring them to the to Sinai. He gives them the law, and Israel, in exchange, decided to swear loyalty to God. Exodus chapter 24 establish the ratification of the covenant and the enactment of that covenant with God. Remember that in Exodus chapter 20, they say, all that the Lord has said we will do, we will obey and we will do. And then on chapter 24 is a covenant renewal, but also the enactment of the covenant with blood. You remember, blood was sprinkled upon the people, upon the book and the altar, and the rest was put on the altar. So now we have they are indexing with Israel, so they have to follow the law because they have swear to be loyal to God as a vassal and God as the great sovereign. While they were in Egypt, the Pharaoh was their sovereign. So now it's more than bringing offerings. The offerings bring to God demonstrate what a loyalty will be to a deity. Now, Israel has to be in submission before the divine authority. It has to be personal communal devotion, gratitude for received gifts. God gave them the land, God gave them the law, God gave them protection, God gave them prosperity, everything. Active fidelity to the God being worshipped. Religious political tribute system. In the ancient Near East, religion and politics were inseparable. Offerings functioned within an integral tribute system that reflected the power relations between lords and vassal, the vassal and the king. Subjects brought material tribute to their monarch to confirm and renew their political and personal loyalty. Now you gotta go through the musafin, you gotta go through the days, the appointed times, the moeds, that God actually required his people to show before him and consider the vassal coming before the great king as an act of tribute. The worshipper and the God, likewise, worshipper offer sacrifice to their God as an act of renewing religious loyalty. The king as mediator. The king, as representative of the people, may sacrifice on behalf of the entire nation, especially in festivals or crises. Offering within the framework of the Israelite covenant. In Israel, offerings share the logic of Eastern tribute, but they were unequally framed within the covenant between God and his people. They were not simply religious transactions, they were acts of renewing a relationship of alliance. For example, national and religious identity. Festive offerings reinforce the collective identity of the Israelite people as a chosen community committed to God. So by them bringing offerings, they are showing that they are committed to God. Publicly demonstration of loyalty, presenting an offering before the temple was a visible act of allegiance to God before the community and before God Himself. Now remember, ancient Near East or in Canaan, they could the pagans they put an altar anywhere in the land and they enacted offerings or they put offerings upon that altar. The God of Israel, He says, no, I don't want you to build an altar anywhere you want. I will establish the place where I want you to come and worship me, which actually is Jerusalem, the Mount Zion, which she has chosen. He has chosen to put his name there. He has chosen to put his temple, his house, his temple there. And he has chosen to put his altar there, the only place where Israel can come and bring offerings and put them upon the altar. Now, the legality for this is going to be in the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, verse 11. God has given the blood to do expiation. Let's go really quick over there to the book of Leviticus chapter 11, because this is very important for us to consider the legality in this aspect. When we go to Leviticus 11 chapter 17 chapter 11, it's going to say, for the life of every living thing is in the blood. So I myself have designed it to you on the altar to make atonement for your life. So God have assigned the blood to make atonement for our life, but where does that blood has to be put on? That's the question. Where do you have to put the blood in order for that blood to become a valid blood, for that blood to be considered the blood that makes or bring atonement upon somebody? It's actually said that it has to be put on the altar. Which altar? Where is the altar that God has established as the legal means to mediate and to be purified and for the priest to put the offerings? Obviously, that's the altar in Jerusalem. So this verse is actually more legal than what sometimes we think about it. So it says, for the life of every living thing is in the blood. I myself have assigned it to you on the altar to make atonement for your life. For the blood makes atonement by means of the life. So let's go here to this again. So now they have to bring um, the offerings demonstrate the loyalty to God. If somebody put an offering outside the altar from Jerusalem, their loyalty is not to the God of Israel. And therefore, that would be considered, somebody doing that in the land would be considered something, an act of idolatry, because it's not the altar that God has established. There is a story in the Bible when the tribe that stayed beyond the Jordan, they established an altar, and the Israelites thought that they were worshiping or they were committing idolatry, and they went over there ready to wipe them out. Remember? So why would anybody doing an altar would be considered the same thing? Refusal as rebellion. Failing to present offering was interpreted as a sign of spiritual rebellion or even idolatry. Isaiah 1 and Micah chapter 1. The three pilgrimage festival. The Torah prescribed the three annual festival all Israelite men were to go up to Jerusalem and present offering before God, turning this moment into solemn act of renewal of the national covenant. For example, we have Pesach or Passover, commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. The offering record Israel's foundation salvation as a people liberated by God. The Feast of the First Fruit or Pentecost. According to later tradition of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, the offering was an act of thanksgiving for the harvest and revelation. Sukkot, tabernacles, reminder of the wilderness pilgrimage. The offering acknowledged divine providence over the people's history. Now, we have some verses in the Bible that are going to look like they're talking against the offerings, and many people use this text or these verses to say, no, God does not want offerings anymore. Now, let's go into those verses really quick and try to understand their legal aspect as far as the covenant. The prophetic denunciation, offering without justice. Why do I need multitude of your sacrifice? Bring me no more vain offerings. Learn to do good and seek justice. So the context here is not the offering really, is the way they are acting. That's why it actually says learn to do good and seek justice. The prophet of ancient Israel developed a sharp critique of empty cultic practice. For them, an offering presented without justice or obedience was not genuine devotion, but false loyalty, religious hypocrisy that offended God. God, in Isaiah chapter 1, 11 to 17, rejects sacrifice, incense, and sacred assemblies when they are accompanied by social injustice. Authentic loyalty requires ethical obedience, not ritual alone. In the ancient Near East, when you study ancient Near East, they their ritual was supposed to bring them prosperity. Their ritual was supposed to basically buy the favor of the gods. In Israel, you cannot bring a ritual and buy God's favor. God's favor is upon you by your alliance and your devotion to the covenant. If you are rebellious against God, he will act the same way. And you can say, how can we prove this? So let's go to the book of Leviticus really quick here. Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26 says verse 3. If you walk in my statutes and are sure to obey my commandments, I will give you rains in their time, so that the land will give its yield and the trees of the field will produce the fruit. Threshing season will extend for you until the season of the harvesting grapes, and the season for harvest grape will extend until sowing season. You will eat your bread until you're satisfied, and you will live securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land so that you will lie down to sleep without anyone terrifying you. I will remove harmful animals from the land, and no sword war will pass through your land. Okay, let's continue here. But um, verse 11, I will put my tabernacle in your midst, and I will not abhor you. I will walk upon you, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Now, verse 14, if, however, you do not obey me and keep all these commandments, if you reject my statutes and abhor my regulations so that you do not keep my commandments, and you break my covenant, I, for my part, will do this to you. I will inflict horror on you, consumption of fever, which diminish eyesight and drain away the vitality of your life. You will sow your seed in vain because your enemies will eat it. I will set my face against you. You will be struck down before your enemies. Those who hate you will rule over you, and you will flee. So here is the proof based on the wording and the legal aspect of the covenant that God actually uh, God will allow this to happen if you are not faithful to the covenant. Now, that's where it establishes God as a God who you cannot buy his favor, but you can be loyal to him. If you're loyal to the covenant that you swore, he will bless you, he will multiply, he will provide, he will bring blessing. But if we are not loyal to his covenant, the consequence of the covenant activate themselves, bringing those. If we see the methodology, it will bring the rebellion, will bring chaos, death, and exile. So let's go here really quick. So this is the problem here. They are not being loyal to the covenant. Remember that justice and rectitude are part of the loyalty of the covenant. Those are part. Actually, if you see here the methodology, it will say covenant, righteousness, and justice. So if they do not practice righteousness and justice, therefore they are not proclaiming God's character. They are bringing shame upon God's name. And therefore they are transgressing the covenant. They are in rebellion against the covenant because God, his character is to help the oppressed, to help the widow, to help the needy. Therefore, it's part of the covenant and it's part of God's character. So Micah is saying the prophet denounces Israel for offering sick and unclean animals, which reflect contempt for the covenant. The quality of the offering reveals the quality of devotion. So therefore, when they acted in this way, they are bringing offerings that actually are revealing the heart of the people. Now, let me ask you a question. What offering or what's, remember that in the New Testament, the apostles and Paul and others will, and Peter also, they will compare or they will make an allegatory of what's the condition of the believer within the context of the temple. Sometimes people don't realize that they are not saying that you are the temple of God literal, but you are in an example. You should be an example. You should reflect the example of what the temple was. So being loyal to God, uh, let's say if you are an offering, that's why it says present your bodies as an offering before, as a living sacrifice before God. So now you have to consider what was a living sacrifice for God. How do somebody bring a sacrifice or an offering to the temple, and what was considered an acceptable offering for God? Because if you're not bringing an acceptable offering, if you're not acting according to it, then it's going to show us, it's going to the quality, like it says here, the quality of the offering reveals the quality of devotion. So our offering, how we present ourselves before God, is going to uh, reflect our heart, our intention. Are we willing to be a living sacrifice? If we're willing to be a living sacrifice before God, then what must we do? What's the level of holiness that God requires? What are the laws inside the covenant that we have to follow? What have we swear allegiance to, and are we following, being loyal to God? Or are we trying to make shortcuts like they were trying to do sometimes during the period of Israel, where they would take the lands from and oppress the needy and the widow, and then they will bring an offering to God and presented themselves, and the offering they were bringing was a lame offering or probably a blemish offering. What is our sacrifice before God? Are we in the same condition, or are we trying to adhere to the commandments and being faithful to God? A key gesture of fidelity in the ancient Near East, relationship of loyalty in the ancient Near East, were expressed through specific physical rituals and legal gestures. These acts were not merely symbolic, they had legal and political value in the ancient world. For example, a sign of a covenant, bear a sign, offering sacrifices, mark the body. Each of these gestures constituted a legal, political, and spiritual act that publicly bound the worshipper or vassal to their lord or deity. Understanding them is essential for correctly interpreting biblical texts. Sign number one, or pronounce a covenant. Sign or pronounce a covenant. Vassal treaties were solemn documents in which the subjects swore loyalty to the king. They include a list of blessings and curses that would take effect depending on the keeping or breaking of the covenant. Hittite Assyrian treaties are paradigm example of this literary genre. In the Bible, Exodus 24, 3 through 8, Israel ratified its covenant with God by proclaiming, we will do everything the Lord has said. Moses sprinkled the blood of the sacrifice on the people as a sign of the covenant being sealed. Deuteronomy 26:17 through 19 reflects the mutual oath. Israel chooses God as its God, and God chooses Israel as his special people. Gesture 2. Offer sacrifice and tributes. In the ancient Near East, bazaars offered periodic tribute to their king or local god as a tangible affirmation of their loyalty. This included animals, precious metal, and agricultural goods. Tribute was expected, and its absence amounted to a declaration of rebellion. So, if they did not bring the tribute that was expected from them, that was actually established in the covenant, because when they established the covenant, it actually establishes the tribute that they were supposed to bring. And you will read, when you read the kings of Israel that made a treaty with Babylon, and they or the Assyrians, and they did not send the tribute as they were supposed to. And if they did not bring, it actually amounted and added until it was considered a declaration of rebellion. In the Bible, Leviticus 1 through 7 regulates the details, the different type of offering as an expression of obedience and covenant faithfulness. The case of Saul, Psalm 10, First Samuel 10, 8 and 13 dramatically illustrate the disobedience in matters of worship was equivalent to a rejection of divine authority. Very important, because if you do not bring your offering at the appointed time, if you do not bring the offering in a pure state, if you bring an offering that was supposed to be disqualified, then it's considered rebellion against God and rejection of the divine authority. The case of Saul, cultic disobedience as covenant breach. You have acted foolishly. You have not kept the command of God, your God. Now your kingdom will not endure. First Samuel 13 through 14. The command, Samuel instructs Saul to wait 7 days before offering the sacrifice. The instruction was not a mere ritual detail, but a test of obedience and recognition of divine authority mediated by the prophet. The transgression, under pressure from the Philistine enemies and the dispersal of his army, Saul offered the sacrifice himself without waiting for Samuel. This act was interpreted not as a tactical impatience, but as an usurpation of priestly authority and disloyalty to God. It sealed his rejection as king. So this is very important. And here I'm giving you some sources from the ancient Near East. The cultural context of offering and biblical faithfulness cannot be fully understood without examining the extra biblical sources of the ancient Near East that illuminate these practices for documentary collection are especially relevant. The Amarna letters, diplomatic texts from the 14th century BCE, in which Canaanite and Assyrian vassals prostrate themselves 7 times, 7 before the pharaoh, expressing their total subjugation. Assyrian treaties, the treaties of the Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, describe ritual of loyalty, punishment for disloyalty, and symbol of submission to the Assyrian king. The Code of Hammurabi contains formula of oath-bound loyalty to the king as chosen of Marduk, reflecting the unity between political and religious power in Mesopotamia. Hebrew Bible, Exodus 14, ratification of the covenant. 1 Samuel 10 and 13, anointing of Saul's loyalty. Psalm 2 and 63, gesture of loyalty and worship. Let's see the Amarna letters. The Amarna letters are a diplomatic correspondence archive of the 14th century, discovered in Tel Amarna, Egypt. They comprise more than 380 cuneiform tablets documenting the relation between the Egyptian pharaoh and the ruler of Canaan, Syria, and Mesopotamia. So the Canaanite vassal opened their letter proclaiming at the feet of the Lord, the King, the Son of the heavens, I prostrate myself 7 times and 7 times. This ritual formula reflects the exact protocol of submission that also appear in biblical narrative approaching the divine. Biblical relevance. This letter shows the expression of loyalty in the Old Testament were not original to Israel, but part of a shared political religious vocabulary of the ancient Near East. They allow biblical texts to be read in their real culture context. The Assyrian vassal treaties, rituals of loyalty. For example, Esarhaddon, his succession treaty required vassal to swear loyalty to designated heir on the penalty of specific and detailed divine curses. Ashurbanipal, his texts include ritual of loyalty in which subject must touch the symbol of the god Ashur to seal the commitment to obedience. Biblical parallel. The Assyrian treaties share structure with Deuteronomy, historical preamble, stipulation, curses and blessing, and call to divine witness. Okay, let's go here. Psalms of loyalty. There were psalms, and remember that in the temple also there were psalms that were sung. So, conclusion and bibliography. Offerings in the ancient Near East and Israel were political, spiritual, and legal acts of loyalty, not only religious acts. Ancient Near East system of religious political tribute provides the conceptual framework to understand Israelite worship. Gesture of fidelity, covenant sacrifice, bodily mark, visible sign, form a shared culture vocabulary through ancient Near East. Israel reinterpret this practice in light of exclusive covenant with God, giving them a unique ethical and eschatological content. So when we read the Bible, when we read the book of Numbers, chapter 28 and 29, which actually deals with the commandment of the musaf, it's actually completely different from the ancient world. And I want to finish with this here from these statements. This says throughout ancient Near East, religious festival often serve to renew the vitality of the gods, ensure agricultural fertility, or preserve the stability of the cosmos. For example, during Babylon Akitu festival elaborated processions, banquets, and sacrifice to affirm Marduk kingship and renew cosmic order for the coming year. The Musaf serve an entirely different purpose. Its sacrifices do not strengthen God. Instead, each additional offering publicly declares that God Himself has sanctified that particular day, and Israel responds faithfully to His summons. The Musaf does not alter God's power, it transformed the covenant's community into response. So in the ancient Mesopotamia, it dealt with the dying gods, the magic ritual, and all that stuff. In the Bible, it deals with God. God does not need anything from humanity, but He does require loyalty. When you bring something to God, basically you are saying, "You are my sovereign, I accept your sovereignty, and therefore I bring you a tribute." The offerings, the musaf, the tamid, and all the offerings in the Bible are offerings brought to God during the festive days. And God has provided a means based on the book of Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11, in which the blood is given for atonement upon the altar, the legal altar established by God. So when we study the offerings, we have to consider the temple, the holiness, the contrast with the ancient world, and also how God wants his people to approach him, while in the ancient Near East, nobody could approach the deities. God actually want to see you. He want to meet with you. He want to approach to you, and he wants you to approach to him. All of that can be done in an orderly conduct when we adhere to the covenant, when we practice righteousness and justice, when we live an honorable life, and we are a new creation, when we are not in chaos, but in order established by God, by the covenant, and therefore we can approach the sacred space, we can approach God's temple in an orderly manner only until the place where God allow us to come in. If we're Israelites, we can only come to the court of Israel. If somebody is a Gentile, he can only come to the court of the Gentiles. Therefore, approaching to God in a orderly conduct, so that you may be seen by Him, and He will extend His favor upon you as long as you are loyal to His covenant, as long as you defend His honor, as long as you defend His people and the holy things, the temple, His people, the offerings, and those people who He has established, the priests, to be the mediators between His people and God, and also the Messiah. I hope this teaching be a blessing to you, and if it is for you, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and also going into our webpage at mamarachel.com. And I hope that you be edified with these studies. Shalom.